Du lyssnar på Fasciaguiden, en podcast om kroppen, om ny forskning och om en förändrad syn på hälsa, verk och smärta. Jag heter Axel Bohlin och du ska nu få höra en av de häftigaste intervjuer vi någonsin har gjort. För den är med Gerald Pollack. Medverkar också Hans Bohlin, och vi kanske inte säger så mycket för att Gerald Pollack har mycket att berätta om. Jag skulle vilja säga så här att de första kanske 10 minuterna kan vara lite svåra att förstå för den som inte är insatt i ämnet, men lyssna till slutet, för det han har att berätta kan förändra hela världen. Det här är en kraftfull intervju och det han pratar om är väldigt, väldigt intressant. Så trevlig lyssning. You are listening to the Fascia Guide. I'm Axel Bohlin. I'm here with Hans Bohlin and with Gerald Pollack. It's an honor to have this interview with you. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm delighted to have a chance to chat with you, and I'm equally delighted, or maybe even more so, to come to the conference that you're organizing, which takes place not long from now. And thanks for the opportunity to describe the work that we've been doing in water, and then also some philosophical issues. I'm really thrilled to be able to do that. So, if I may start, you didn't ask the question, but I'll start by saying,
Go ahead.
what prompted us to study water? After all, water has been studied for hundreds of years by many scientists, and you'd think that everything that could be known about water must already be known. And so, why one more scientists getting on the water bandwagon? Well, we spent several decades actually studying muscles and how they contract. And I was having a good time, and I think we contributed substantially to the field, even though the obstacle was a Nobel laureate, a distinguished one, who had his own theory, and we had evidence that the theory was actually not working. It didn't agree with so much evidence, but the guy's name was Sir Andrew Huxley, and he was a great among greats. He's a member of the Huxley family. He won the Nobel Prize for previous work. Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and such. And I learned a little bit about the sociology of science, that if you have a name and a distinction like that, and he was the kind of guy, he would walk into a room and there was a hush. It was like God had just entered the room. So, no need to say anything. And I realized that's the sort of distinction carried a lot of weight in science, and it almost didn't matter what evidence you had. This was a special kind of person, a godlike person that you needed to follow. So I found out that no matter how much evidence we produced that didn't fit the theory persisted, and it persists to this day. And on the other hand, we were enjoying ourselves and having a good time finding out how muscle really contracted, but not many people paid attention because of this godlike figure. And we became friends, sort of. And he would send Christmas cards, and or his wife would send Christmas cards, and we'd see each other at conferences. But I got to tell you that I really tried to avoid him, because I just didn't know, what are you going to talk about? A nice day today, the weather is beautiful. Because philosophically we were completely at odds. So that's a bit of background.
What was the main distinction? Like, what was the main difference?
Well, so his theory, is without a diagram, it's imagine one rod, okay, one rod, and like a rowboat, a scull, and on one side you have oarsmen that are rowing like that, and the other side you have oarsmen that are rowing this way, and what this rowing action catches another filament, and with each stroke, the filament runs this way, like that. And you have a huge number of these. So these secondary or thin filaments gradually move in this direction, and that unit called the sarcomere shortens. Okay, that's his theory, and and the evidence we had or have or had is is multifold. The first is that the amount of tension that's developed should depend on the degree of overlap of the thick filament and the thin filaments. If you have almost no overlap, then these oars that are rowing, very few of them are engaged. And if the sarcomere is this length with full overlap of these thin filament and thick filaments, you get a lot of tension. Well, it doesn't work. It works in some instances, but in most instances, it doesn't matter how much overlap you have. And those papers, including ours and other people's, are not cited because they don't agree. And we understand the difference between the two results. That that's one of them. Now, the more important one is that in the theory, this thick filament with the oars sticking out and the thin filaments never change length. And papers by Sir Andrew Huxley argue that indeed they don't change length, but if you read through the paper, actually they do change length through his major paper. But he minimizes that, oh, it's some sort of artifact. But in a review article I wrote and presented that almost every paper that's been produced, there were like 50 of them, say the opposite, or demonstrate the opposite, that the filaments actually do change length during contraction. The filaments themselves shorten, and that's obviously at odds with the theory. I could tell you more, but I think
It was an interesting topic to start with because it actually opens up another type of discussion, which is interesting to just get into a little bit, and that is the politics of science, because that sounds like this is what this is.
is.
And we've had a lot of these discoveries recently as ourselves, is that when you try to present something that could be a an interesting solution to a problem, but it's another way of thinking than what people are used to, there are gatekeepers who wants to defend their way of looking at things. And then it's not a discussion of logic or science, it's just a matter of opinion, or a matter of defending your position, basically. This sounds like one of those scenarios. I mean, why not be open and look at, oh, hey, you discovered this, let's talk more about it. Why be so stuck to your
Well,
own
yeah,
idea?
precisely. That's such an important issue, and that's what I meant by the sociology of science. Politics is probably a better word, and you got to wonder about this position, and it's all over science. And I, I I think there are several reasons. One of them is ego. You know, we've we've subscribed to a particular position. We've become experts on that. We don't like to be challenged because we have to learn something new, and we feel we've been teaching students the former idea, and if that's completely wrong, we have to completely change our attitude. And there's more than that because right now money is really important, and to run a laboratory you need you need money. If if you're the way the grant system works now is if you have an idea and the idea challenges the point of view, the prevailing point of view, it's an uphill obstacle because I give an example because I think this encapsulates one of the main reasons why people are unwilling to accept a radical, a seemingly radical point of view that makes a lot of sense. It has to do with the grant system. You need money to do experiments. nowadays. And the way the grant system is set up, so let's say the world believes the Earth is flat. Okay, everyone believes the Earth is flat. I can look out my window and I can see Lake Washington, and it looks flat. So it's normal to think that the Earth is flat. And you, Axel, you have an idea, or Hans, maybe, has the same idea that, I think the world is round. And you think it's round because you've seen satellite photos, and these satellite photos show a curvature of the Earth. And you've seen photos taken from the moon, and the Earth looks like a disc, like a coin. And you think, scratch your head and saying, boy, this this is so important that I should change everything I do, and I want to study the shape of the Earth because it's such an important feature. And um, and so you put together a proposal, a grant proposal, and I don't know what the organization is to which you'd apply in Sweden, but in the U.S. it would be the National Science Foundation, or that would be the one. And so you submit your proposal to the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper says, "Hmm, Axel Bohlin, I thought I've heard this name, but I'm not really sure. I don't know. Is this guy for real or is he a crackpot?" And so, in order to make proper judgment, I'd better hire a reviewer who is a real expert in this, and this expert will know whether this guy is indeed a crackpot, or and who is the expert? The expert is the champion of the flat Earth idea.
Yeah.
So you're challenging, you're getting reviewed by
Mm.
by the person you're challenging. And that's
Yeah.
why canny scientists know that they better, if they have an idea that's radical, they better not propose it, because not only will it not succeed, but he'll be labeled as a weirdo. And next time
Mm.
he sends a grant application, it's not going to do so well. We
Mm.
don't want weirdos like that. And so this is a real problem, because science is built on discovery, new discoveries.
Mm.
Otherwise, we don't get anywhere. And if you ask yourself, how many scientific revolutions, which is what science is all about, how many scientific revolutions have you experienced, or have we experienced, say, in the last 50 years? I mean, not technological revolutions, of which there are many, like Zoom, that on which we're operating. But I mean, something equivalent to the discovery of the genetic code, which happened in the
Mm.
1950s, or the splitting of the atom, which happened a decade earlier than that. How many can you name that are of that magnitude, that have changed everything, changed the world for the better or worse, you can argue. But and there haven't been many. At least the people I've asked have had trouble naming. Um, uh,
Mm.
the,
Aren't water one of those that you have been looking
If
at?
it was accepted, and that's I think that the thing you're describing something very important, which is actually one of the core drives behind this whole convention we're doing. Because of this that you're saying, people think that the world is discovered, that we already know everything. And I had this, I remember this really interesting lecture I was on, or I saw on YouTube when I was 16, that changed the course of my life.
really?
Because the lecture was about the true importance of internet in terms of the number of new ideas that will be created now, and also the danger of considering yourself to be a developed country and not a developing country.
Hmm.
Because if you're a developed country, you're already set, you already know, and then that prohibits innovation. And the lecture was about what happens. The idea was simple, that the number of ideas are based on the number of the amount of knowledge and the amount of people who can connect to already known things in a different way. And if there is more knowledge, more education, then the number of ideas will explode. And that's what happened with the internet. Because now when you publish a research article, I can read it directly. I don't have to wait for it to read it in an article, and we can start a forum and chat about it, and we can have a Zoom meeting from across the world and talk about our ideas. So innovation is exploding. but the perception is that everything is already developed. And
Yeah.
I think this is a problem, because of course there are new insights, and the thing you're saying is the thing we've been talking about for 15 years, that there's a new way to look at low back pain, there's a new way to understand cancer, there's a new way to understand inflammation, there's a new way to understand the female body, there's a new way to understand all of these things, because when you're looking at the body as a living body, there are new possibilities. But if the institutions and the paradigm are championing the static dead body, then, or the divided body, or the reducted body, or the reductionist system, then it's hard to change things. And I remember our first conversation, our first email, you wrote to me, I've experienced the same problems with water that you talk about with fascia, because you can't repeat the experiments because the water is ever changing. So it could be something wrong with the whole model, the whole idea on how we try to find out things. So it's yeah, I think it's an interesting way to start the interview. I wasn't prepared for it, but I like it.
Okay, well, yeah, we're in resonance about that. The whole system is antithetical uh, to to the development of generally new ideas. I actually did a survey in the cafeteria where a lot of researchers are, where I often have lunch. I took my clipboard and I went around from table to table, and I asked the same question that you have been asking of all fundamental knowledge that can exist. How much of it do we already know? And I got um, a diversity of answers. They're actually polarized. One group said, oh, 70%, 80%, 60%, something like that. And others said less than 1%, and I think we both resonate with less than 1%. But a large number of people are absolutely convinced that we already know what there is, pretty much what there is to know, and only the details need to be worked out. And with that attitude, which is really prevalent among researchers, we're talking about researchers,
Mhm.
um, it's problematic, and the system of doing science needs a radical revolution because it's antithetical to the the emergence of scientific revolutions. And scientific revolutions are important because it's not just for fundamental knowledge, but whenever there's a revolution, it leads to practical solutions to problems. For example, the light bulb, it took a while to develop, but it replaced the candle. So that was indeed a scientific revolution. It took a while, but it happened. But now we've become less open to it because of the system of doing science. Right now, it requires money, and
Mhm.
money requires applications to granting agencies, which have the problem we just discussed.
Mhm.
It needs change.
Yeah, it makes sense. Um, but your subject is water.
Yeah.
Let's get back to that story.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I was telling you how we started, and as I said, we were doing muscle contraction happily with obstacles. And a guy from Hungary um, was to work in my laboratory, picked him up at the airport, and his wife drove them to my house, and we were going to put them up for the first couple of weeks until they could find a place to live. And he said to me, "You should go to Hungary." Why should I go to Hungary? There's a
Yeah.
symposium. It's an interesting place to go. There's a symposium, and the symposium is to honor the life's work of a well-known scientist, a guy whose name is Ernst. And he had two interests. One was muscle contraction, in which, like me, he was a doubter of the prevailing point of view, and also water. I knew nothing of water except that, muscle is mostly water. It's two-thirds water, but water is never considered. When people develop ideas about how muscle works, they assume that the muscle proteins that do the job are working in a vacuum. No water is present, which is really odd because not only is is the muscle two-thirds water, but if you translate that into the number of water molecules, if you line up all the molecules that exist in the muscle, more than 99, and you count, more than 99% are water molecules. Because they're small, to make up the two-thirds volume, you need a lot of water molecules. But nobody ever considers the role of water in muscle contraction, which is really odd that, 99% of the molecules are ignored, which, if you're looking from outside, this seems a little odd, but that's the way the theory is now. So if you're suggesting that, oh, we should pay attention to the water, um, people will look askance. Why are you bothering us with this nonsense? But anyway, that's not the point. Point is, I went to Hungary. I made my presentation on muscle, and I think it was received okay. And then came another presentation on water. And I'm thinking, what's interesting about water? And I heard a guy, his name is Gilbert Ling, who passed 5 years ago. I heard him make a presentation, and I was just blown away. And Gilbert Ling was actually, in some ways, a rather distinguished guy. He came from China, and he was chosen. The Chinese government, after World War II, decided that they were going to send some promising young scholars to the U.S. to further their studies. And they looked all around China. Population of China is not small, and they picked four people. And uh, and of the four people, three won Nobel Prizes. You can imagine. Gilbert Ling, Gilbert Ling was the fourth one, the only one who did not win a Nobel Prize. And people who know his work, many of them think he should have won two Nobel Prizes, but his work was controversial. And what was his work? So he gave a talk, and he said the water in biology, particularly water in the cell, is not like water in a glass. So water in the glass, at least as we understand it, the molecules are randomly oriented and bouncing around a fierce number of times per second or per millisecond or microsecond or even femtosecond. Um, and he said in biology, that's not the case. He said the water molecules are, he used the term structured. In other words, they're ordered in some way. And he thought of the water molecule as a dipole, like a bean with a plus at one end and minus at the other end. And you can imagine these beans stacking, the plus bonding to the minus of the next one, and so on. And they could stack over a great distance. Now, uh, modern conventional chemistry says, well, yeah, maybe one or two molecular layers of water do this, but once you get beyond that, the effects of thermal motion or Brownian motion means that everything is wiggling around and it can't be more than two or three molecular layers. He said, oh, hundreds, if not thousands, and we found actually millions can be in a slightly different fashion. But anyway, I was just mesmerized by it because he presented abundant evidence that this was the case. This is not just a wild speculation. I, uh, you know, I couldn't sleep. This was this so moved me. But I realized I I tend I tend to be attracted to un, unusual ideas that seem to make sense. But I decided to check myself. And so I got back to Seattle, and I gave one of his books. He had written by that time, I think, three of them, to a few of my students who I thought would be interested in this sort of thing. And I asked, what do you think about this? And and their opinions came back in concert with one another. They said um, that if this is correct, then all of biology is wrong, because all of biology is based on the idea that the cell is filled with this kind of water, not structured water, as Gilbert Ling was suggesting. And also, they said the evidence that he presents in the book is really compelling. So it really looks as though he's correct. So
let me ask you something about this kind of water.
sure.
Uh, there is not the same current in this, right? The same electricity in this kind of water,
I'm not sure what you mean by electricity.
or the like the dipole is different in this water than it is in the structured water, right? I mean, do you show with the structured water there's a different charge or different the
Well, yeah, what we found is a good question. In Gilbert Ling's idea, which, by the way, as we started, we could confirm that there is a kind of structure as Gilbert Ling, but we found the structure is not the same as a stacking of dipoles. So when you speak of electricity, in Gilbert Ling's thesis or idea, electricity doesn't play a role. Dipole is neutral; it's got plus
Mhm.
and minus, and the actual water molecule is neutral. So so there's no the theme of electricity in water. It's irrelevant in Gilbert Ling's terms. It's central in terms of what we discovered. So that's one of the differences that we found once we started doing experiments. But before doing experiment, we had no money to do experiments on water. We had money to study muscle, and I didn't feel it appropriate to extract the money that's designed for something else. It didn't seem I could have done it because after all, muscle is mostly water, but
Yeah.
I didn't feel
I
it.
understand the dilemma. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey guys,
So
you ordered this thing, but I actually have this thing over here that I decided to put all the money into. Yeah.
well, so I decided instead to write a book.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and the first half of the book was to describe what Gilbert Ling has found. And I thought that Gilbert would be thrilled because his books, he'd sit down at the typewriter or word processor, he'd bat something out, and he'd send it off to the publisher. And I kind of was speculating that the word editing maybe is absent from the Chinese language or something like that. And so
Mm.
his books are virtually impenetrable. I mean, you have to be really dedicated to be able to read through and follow. So I thought, I'm going to do Gilbert Ling a favor, and I'm going to try to write something that explains his ideas in terms that even I can understand. um, so I did that. That was the first half of the book, and it got mixed reviews. One review by uh, a Harvard cell biologist whose name escapes me at the moment. And if it's Harvard, you got to pay attention to it, even though soon Harvard may no longer exist if because of political forces. Uh, we'll see about that. But anyway, he said this is a 304-page preface to the future of cell biology. That was nice. Other people said, pay no attention to this book. It's nonsense because we all know that Gilbert Ling is a crackpot. So,
That's a big spread of opinion from one book.
well, the spread is actually a positive sign. It was the famous and creative Nobel laureate Albert St. Georgi who said he had a lot of ideas. He said only when an idea received polarized response, as you're talking about, did I know I was onto something important.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
when some people denigrated the whole thing, objected to it, and other people loved it, then he knew his idea was going to go somewhere. So it's interesting that comment that you made.
Mm.
But the surprise for me is that Gilbert Ling hated it, and
Why?
because he said in an email sent to me with CC to practically everybody in the field, he said, "You didn't give me enough credit." He expected to have his name in every paragraph, um, and I basically I said in the preface, "This is Gilbert Ling's work." I said, "This is not my work. I'm just trying to present Gilbert Ling's ideas." And of course, I mentioned his name sporadically through that first half of the book, which was dedicated but he, it's a matter of ego. We all have fragile egos, and depending on how fragile one's ego is. So he was furious with me about this, and he broadcasted this throughout the whole field. It took me 10 years to restore a friendship with him. I mean, it was crazy that the two of us are enemies. And I think that may be one of the reasons why Gilbert never got a Nobel Prize. More than this, he invented the glass microelectrode, which revolutionized the ability to measure the electrical potential inside of cells.
Mm.
And eventually, it was used by patch clamp people to win Nobel Prizes. So many Nobel Prizes came, uh, starting with the technique invented by Gilbert Ling,
Mm.
over and above his ideas about cell water. So anyway, that's how we started. And
But then let me ask you, but why I wanted to know that about the charge of the water in the cell is because if the biology is built on the cells being filled of this kind of tap water,
yeah,
but then the idea that it's filled of structured water, but then the idea that it's filled of these currents, that must change everything. I mean, that's looking
yeah.
at a cell that's like this and looking at a cell that's full of life, of charges, of movement, of, I mean, that must be.
I know what you're driving at. So the cell, every cell is negatively charged. And the question is, well, how does it get negatively charged? And I'll tell you first what we were able to find, or it's a very simple reason. And then I'll tell you what the world believes, which I
Mhm.
believe is wrong. What we found the cell is filled with structure. We call it EZ for exclusion zone, EZ water, or we also call it fourth phase water. All of those terms are basically the same. It's just different synonyms for the same. We found that the structured water, the EZ water, fourth phase water, in biology is negatively charged. And so if the cell is filled with negatively charged water, of course it's going to be negatively charged. It's it's about as simple as you can get. Now, um, the prevailing view is no, that there's nothing to do with easy water because easy water is a relatively recent discovery. But I had to figure out some reason why the cell is negatively charged. And and the prevailing view is that in the membrane of the cell are some, I always look for a word to describe it. I don't like the word gadgets because it kind of denigrates the whole idea. But somehow embedded in the membrane are these, gadgets that are membrane pumps that can pump ions and other substances either into the cell or out of the cell. And then there are selective channels that open to let only one substance through down the concentration gradient. And the first idea, um, or the first example of the prevailing idea is about the sodium pump, because outside the cell is lots of sodium and inside the cell is lots of potassium. And the question is, well, how does a potassium get inside the cell, and how does a high concentration of sodium get outside? Why aren't they in equilibrium? And the idea is there's a pump. So the pump pumps sodium out and it pumps potassium in. By now, the number of pumps in the membrane um, exceeds 1,000. The membrane, someone discovers a concentration gradient of some substance, that, oh, there's a pump. And there's also a channel that allows only certain ions and substances to pass through, either into the cell or out of the cell. And so you can imagine the vast complexity of this system to explain why the cell is negatively charged, because if you pump more sodium out than you pump potassium in, uh, the cell loses positive charge from neutrality, and if you lose positive charge, it becomes negative. So that's kind of the prevailing view.
Mm.
a half dozen reasons exist to suggest that that view is erroneous, even though it's believed by essentially everybody in the field, very few exceptions. There are some. Um, if you want, I can tell you a few of the reasons why I think this idea is bankrupt, completely bankrupt, and a easier, simpler idea is that the cell is filled with easy water. Easy water, at least biological easy water, is negatively charged, and therefore the cell is negatively charged. Very simple.
Is it the same with cancer cells? Are they also negative charge?
Well, um, um, uh, the reason I'm hesitating is, there's we have a story about cancer cells that needs a little background, and I'm just wondering. I mean, the answer is yes. But I, in order to make the point, do you want me to launch into it?
Oh, we can,
Or something else? I'm happy
We can
to.
put a pin in it and get back to it in a while. But that's definitely because so I understand the challenge of being of a radically different opinion than most people. But it's the same thing we discussed when we had an interview with Jean-Claude Guimberteau or when we had an interview with Thomas Levy, that when you see something with your own eyes, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So when you saw that presentation, you couldn't unsee it. When your students read that book, they couldn't unread it. And it's the same thing that we've discovered, that if you see something you can't explain and it moves you, it shakes you, well, then you kind of have to discover what it was. And then when you do that and realize that this could be, everything could be different from what you think. But then what we have discovered, or I have discovered a lot, is that it actually makes sense from a natural point of view, from a human point of view, from a experience point of view, from a principle point of view, from how I go about my life point of view, but it doesn't make sense from a institutional science point of view. So is all the experiences we have about life wrong, or is there something with the institutional science that is weird? Because if you look at, for example, if you look at water, and you talk about the tap water, or that we talked about now, or you have, you said you haven't driven into those 99% of molecules in the body, but if you look at water, I mean, all life needs water. I mean, water is the key element of all life on this planet. It's perhaps the most important substance there is to understand why we can even live. I mean, it's in the air, it's in us, it's in plants, it's in animals, it's everywhere. So, I mean, water is the central thing about life, basically. And we don't really understand it, and we say it's an anomaly, and we say it's. I mean, all the experiences says that what you're saying is right, and then we need some kind of science to tell us that, well, you might feel that way, but it's not true because it's like this instead. And I don't buy that picture. I mean, I see the problem here.
Um, yeah, I'm not sure how to respond because um, I feel sympathetic with everything you just said, but I'm not sure if there's a question that you're trying to get at for me to address. Uh, uh,
No, I just wanted to confirm your
oh
story so
yeah,
far, your journey so far, and why. Because we talked about the how you discovered that the current way of looking at things is not how it looks. So I think we can move past that this is a new way of looking at things, and then start getting into what you actually have discovered, or your insights about water.
yeah. Okay. Well, we started with Gilbert Ling's ideas once we got a little bit of money to start studying water, and and we I thought that Gilbert Ling was right on, that his ideas were absolutely absolutely correct, and we had no intention or no idea to discover anything beyond, but we did. First thing we want to discover is whether there are regions of water that where there was structure. And we set up a chamber. This is not in biology, it's in an experimental chamber. And the chamber was filled with water and little particles. We used microspheres, which are used in scientific study, about 1 micrometer, tiny little particles suspended in the water. And then we immersed something in the water that had a hydrophilic surface. We had reason to think that certain gels might do that. And we observed, and we found that next to the gel, the microspheres began to be excluded. And the region of exclusion um, existed next to every face of the gel. And, and in these regions, the microspheres were progressively pushed out. And so if we thought if the microspheres are pushed out, then this is now pure water. And a crystalline-like water, liquid crystalline-like water that Gilbert Ling had been suggesting. So we thought, yeah, we confirmed there's a region next to certain surfaces that conformed to what Gilbert Ling had been discussing, and we were very happy to find that. And we found that not only with certain gels, but various polymers and biological surfaces, it seemed to be rather general. And that's when we decided to call this water the exclusion zone, because it excluded all any junk that you wanted to put in, various dyes, particles, you name it. So it turned out to be really general. And we thought the name exclusion zone, which was suggested by an Australian colleague, was just right because, at least in this country, it's EZ, exclusion zone, which is easy to remember and easy, it rolls off your tongue. In Sweden, I fear that it's EZ. Am I wrong about that? Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, EZ. So it's not EZ, remember, it's a little awkward. But so easy kind of flows off the tongue. Yeah. A better term is probably liquid crystalline water. And later we called it fourth phase water because every feature of this water seemed to differ from ordinary liquid water. So we thought if liquid water is the third phase or one of the phases, then this would be fourth phase. It's really incorrect because we found that the easy water, the region we're talking about later, is not H2O anymore. And I'll explain that in a moment. It's actually H3O2. Uh, we found, so the reason we of course explored this easy region to find out its properties, and every property we measured turned out to be different from liquid water. And one of them, I had experience myself using Gilbert Ling's microelectrodes, sticking it into cells, and I thought, hey, let's stick it into the exclusion zone and see what we find. Uh, I thought it's going to be neutral because we started with neutral water. And why should it be anything but neutral? Well, it turned out that it was negatively charged. And boy, that caused a lot of head scratching because if, uh, if you start with neutral water and you wind up with a substantial fractional volume that's negatively charged, how could that be? There must be another region of positive charge somewhere else because you can't, you started, when you start with neutral, you have to wind up with neutral. You, how otherwise could it be? And so we found that the region beyond uh, this exclusion zone had positive charge. And that's where one of the main differences comes with Gilbert Ling's ideas, because um, you know, if you start with a dipole, dipoles are neutral, and you could stack neutral dipoles from Seattle to Uppsala, and you never get negative charge uh, because each component is neutral. Uh, so what we found is this is more like a battery. We have the easy water that's negatively charged, and we have a positively charged region beyond that. So that's exactly the same as a battery. And later we found we could extract current from that battery, um, and this was proof of principle that this is really occurring, that we really have a separation of charge. And so that's a fundamental difference between Gilbert Ling's idea and our finding, our experimental finding. Um, so if you have a battery, first question is, what charges the battery? Every battery needs to get charged. We found there are two possible sources. The first source is light, and I'd like to say we found this, but the truth is that it was found by a young undergraduate student, about 18 years old, who had very little knowledge or understanding, but he joined the laboratory,
Mm.
and and he was playing around with the chamber that I just described, later version of it. And I keep thinking back and trying to think whether he was bored and wanted to try something different, or whether he was creative and wanted to try something different. So he took the lamp that was sitting next to the chamber. It was one of these gooseneck lamps you could bend any which way, and he bent it so that the light shined on the chamber, on a part of the chamber. And he quickly called me in from my office, which is right near the lab, and he showed me, and I said, "My goodness, you found the source of energy," because he showed me that the region that was illuminated, the exclusion zone, grew by a factor
Mm.
of 3 times or something like this.
Mm.
Uh, so, so I thought, my goodness, this student has really found the source of energy. It's light, and it took me a while to realize that there was real precedent for this, because in photosynthesis, step one, and I think 20 steps or something like this. Step one is light incident on the plant and producing a separation of OH minus and H plus in water. And
Mm.
that's pretty much the same as what we found. So there's ample precedent, and excuse me, the precedent has been developed somewhat, but there's reason to think that this is correct. We repeated the experiment. We tried to find out which wavelengths of light, because an incandescent bulb contains wavelengths ranging at the short end from ultraviolet to the long end, infrared. And we found that ultraviolet and most of the visible spectrum had no appreciable effect. But when you get into the reds, the longer visible wavelengths, there began to be an effect. And when you get into the infrared, the longest wavelengths, then there's a profound effect, extraordinary effect. Very small amounts of infrared light could produce a huge expansion of the EZ. So,
Mm.
so we found the source of energy for charging this battery is basically infrared light, and infrared is all around us. If you if you were to turn off the lights in your studio, where you are right now, I guess you're home, or I'm not sure where you are, but in such a way that visually you could see nothing, and and your cell phone camera could record nothing. If you had an infrared camera, you'd be able to see not only your face and your headphones and the microphone and every one of those books behind you very clearly, because they're
Mm.
all generating infrared energy. Not so much as the sun, but they're and so that's the reason why the military uses infrared sensors or infrared cameras or enhanced binoculars to look at the enemy, to check out their tanks and guns and
Mm.
whatever in the dark at night.
Mm.
So it's all around us, which means that the energy that's required to build easy water is always there. Um, and therefore, in not only inside your body, but in nature, throughout the environment, um, wherever there's a hydrophilic surface and next to water, that water will turn into easy water to a certain extent. And if you can somehow add more infrared energy, like the sun suddenly comes out, that the amount of easy water will grow.
Mm.
So that's the battery story, or at least that's what we found as the origin of the battery. So this energy, the question that comes up next is, well, does your body use this kind of energy? And I think the answer is yes. Um, and if you ask me about that, I will go into it, but it's maybe another aspect of the story about, how when your cell is filled with easy water and it's got electrical energy, potential energy, and has the capability of doing work, how is all of this manifested in biology? So, oh, I'm sorry, someone is, let me turn this off. Okay.
But I also love how someone who was new, didn't know much, just fooled around, helped you make this discovery. It seems like a lot of historical things has been from someone just doing that, or just I remember like hearing some like famous songs being like, oh, repeat that, you just what you just did again, from someone who just walked by and just hummed on something. It's like so many times a stroke of inspiration from some um unexpected places actually was the thing that did it. And I think looking at things with fresh eyes is a key to finding new things.
Uh,
um
Absolutely. And I think youth is important for this because the younger you are, the wider your eyes
mm,
are, wider open are your eyes. So we have several discoveries in the lab, several really important discoveries that came from young undergraduate students or graduate students. We have a bunch of talented students at our university,
mm,
and they're unleashed. They feel, or I try to create an open environment in which they have a project and we agree together on the nature. I usually offer three different projects and they choose one, and I don't restrict them in any way. I'm not hovering over them to work 15 hours a day to produce results that we can publish in the next paper. It's more you're free, and
mm,
pursue whatever you think is important. And
mm,
and sometimes you're right on. Sometimes they will come up with ideas and features that I never would have thought of, but they thought of, and they're sometimes critically important. I agree
mm.
with you 100%.
Yeah.
As as the students get older, they're less open because they realize they have a career ahead of them, and
Mm,
if they take on a view that's antithetical to the prevailing view, all they face in the future are obstacles. It's
mm,
unfortunate, and so for self-preservation, uh, they moved toward um, toward the conventional view.
mm. I mean, one of the reasons we are here was because Hans, you asked a professor in inflammation and microcirculation, um, why do we get back pain? And we couldn't find an answer. And
Yeah.
that's why we're here. I mean, that's the how the journey like really started, or really took it to the next level. So by asking those questions that from a perspective that most people don't ask, could really ignite something. So yeah, that's interesting.
Absolutely, and I so much appreciate your both of you, your openness to I feel that we're really in sync with our points of view,
Yeah.
and I think there are quite a few people out there who are actually open to these points of view. I think the number seems to be increasing,
Mm.
at least from my experience. I give talks at lots of meetings, and I meet so many people who really seem open to unconventional points of view. Uh,
But
yeah,
it just explains so much, because if you so what we have talked about so far is that the structure of the water has a negative charge. There's this exclusion zone water. It also removes unwanted particles. So it's kind of a self-cleaning mechanism, and it's stimulated by by infrared light, which is all around us. And I know you will talk more about the properties of this water, like how it can benefit us and our health. But what's interesting is that this also explains why it's so good for your health to do things that gets you this infrared light. I mean, like hugging someone, or like being in a nice environment with nice people, or like being in nature, like being close to water, or like having a sauna, or like, so there's so many things that makes us feel healthy from an experience point of view, that's explained by this theory. And I love when I love it when life makes sense. I mean, when it's okay, so I'm feeling healthy about this, but this is just placebo or something happening, and then you realize that the placebo or your thoughts are also affecting this type of water. So it's it's interesting to actually have a scientific, very well backed theory that explains the key elements of life.
Oh, absolutely. I never thought about hugging. It makes total sense. So I thought it was other than that, than what you're suggesting, but sure. Hugging a tree is also popular among some people, and
Mm,
the principle may be much the same. But also inside your body, the core of your body, the metabolism is producing heat, which
mm,
is almost synonymous with infrared energy. And so you're getting infrared energy both from outside, from all the sources outside, and also from inside. So you got a lot of infrared energy, and that's why
mm,
you, Axel, are so healthy because
mm.
you got a lot of it. And um, so very, very important. And Hans, also, I'm not sure your age, but you look like the absolute symbol of health.
Thank
You guys know what to do
thank
to,
you.
uh,
Thank you.
to retain your health, and I'm uh, glad to see it. Okay, so
But before you explain further, because I have noticed something that's really interesting, and that is Hans has an excellent memory. And my brother, who's also working with us, has an excellent memory. I mean, he can remember conversations with, we have over 600, 700 customers, and he can remember almost all the conversations with all these people. So if I ask him, what therapist is working in this part of Sweden, he would like, oh, it's these four people, and this one is like this one is like that, and this one is like that. I'm like, how can you remember this? But then I remember almost every podcast episode we have done, and it's around 200 of them now. And I can remember which number of, like, we talked about this subject in this number of this episode, and this was what we
wow,
did.
wow.
And we have an idea that memory actually has to do with like me being able to remember stuff actually has to do with the structured water of my body. Like the more easy
Fully,
water I have, the faster I can, the more intuitive I can be, and the more I can access my own memories. Um,
I fully agree with that because the memory of water is a controversial subject, and um, um, there's a long story about Jacques Benveniste, who was maybe the primary person who was suggesting that water has a memory. Nobody believed him because, when you think of water, you think of this water, and the molecules are bouncing around and they're randomly distributed. So, how on earth could there be memory? But easy water is different because easy water has a particular structure to it, and we found it's you start with a hydrophilic surface, then you get a sheet of easy water which has a hexagonal motif, a honeycomb kind of structure, and that serves as a template for the next sheet. And for the next sheet, and the sheets keep on growing. And as I mentioned, the dimension you can calculate it could be a million layers. Is not atypical. So so it's got structure, and the structure is pretty much the same as a computer memory. Uh,
Mm.
um, and a computer memory has transistors in it, and transistors have two states. We loosely call them 0, 1, or on, off, or whatever. And it turns out that the EZ layer is similar, again, because it contains hydrogens and oxygens in that hexagonal motif. And the oxygens can have five, not two, but five different states, five different so-called oxidation states or charge states. And the most common one that we learn in elementary chemistry is -2. We call that valence. But a more advanced chemistry book will tell you, this is not controversial, that not only can it have -2, but it can have -1, 0, +1, +2, five states. So if you put together the properties of the EZ, the fact that it has an organized structure, and one of the two components has multiple states, it's similar to a computer memory. So we think, I'm not sure what my students and such think, that this is the substrate for memory. It has all the features of a computer memory and better. And also, if you think that this is a reasonable hypothesis, then you could conceive of the idea that computer memories, instead of having transistors or microprocessors, in the future, they can have easy water. Um,
Mm.
um, and because in easy water, the uh, memory structures exist at the atomic level, not at the transistor level, your computer could be the size of a pinhead.
Well, I think that James Oshman, I think he was one of the first who wrote a paper about the memory in the body, because he had interviewed lots of therapists that you can actually touch people and you can get flash up memories.
Yeah.
So it's the memory is not it's everywhere in the body. It's not just in the
Ah,
brain. It's so you can feel
Mm.
this is low energy here. What's has been, and then you can go flash what's there been if it's an accident or if it's trauma or whatever it is.
Mm.
that's so interesting. That's
That
re-
was one thing of James Washman that he explained why I think the electric body, why everything is electric, and what memory can be.
uh,
Yeah, and it also fits into because we have worked with therapists for 15 years, and a lot of people have it's like when you treat a certain area of the body where there's a tension or a we call it a where the flow of the body has stopped, and then you unleash that flow, memories pop up. So it's like a trauma or a memory can be stuck in a certain part of the body, which could be explained by your theory that that memory is actually located in that water in that place of that body. I
oh,
mean,
that's
Hans,
so
you've
interesting.
experienced this, yeah.
That's so interesting. Well, when you think of like your brother who can remember so much, you know, the current idea inside the brain, everything is inside the brain, and the prevailing
Mm.
idea, but it's limited capacity because the number of cells inside the brain
Yeah.
is finite. But we have so much information that we store, not only in the brain but in other tissues too. So if you think of the memory as being incorporated in the water, you have so much more opportunity for
Mm.
memory storage. Um,
And it can also be connected to certain movements in a better way. I mean, if you look at someone being really good at playing the piano, it's
yeah.
that memory is not in their head, it's in their hands. And from personal experience, I play the drums, and I remember being in flow, which is an interesting word to describe it. Um, and I was not thinking about what I was doing. Like my hands acted, and in drums you have there's a different movement and sync between different parts of it. I mean, your 2 feet are doing different things, your hands are doing different things, but you're also experience the room and the others you're playing with and reacting to what they are doing. And if you're thinking about that, that brings you out, that takes you out of the whole experience, then you're not in there. So it's something else going on than the memory of the brain. It's like my body's doing things from memory from that song we've been playing, but I'm also it's a very different experience. And I think sometimes by taking experiences seriously, we can discover things or understand things in a different way.
It's a brilliant insight that you make, I think, into the piano playing. Um, uh, I have a harpsichord at home. I built it actually. I barely play it, And my teacher told me I was her best student, and then I found out I was her only student. She wasn't lying, but I can barely play. But I know, keyboard instruments that it just comes so naturally that if you think it comes from the brain, the delay of signals to be transmitted from the brain down to your fingers, no way to explain it, especially for a trill or something like this
Mm.
that occurs rapidly. That's brilliant, and this is a new insight for me. So thank you.
Oh, we had a whole episode where we talked about like really, if you look at maybe it's not as famous in the US, but Lionel Messi, who's a football player or a soccer player, he plays for Inter Miami now, but he was the best player in the world for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I heard this. This may sound weird. I heard his 12-hour podcast about him and his career. I'm really interested in football or soccer, and they talked about him being in a state of mind where his body moved in a different way and he was aware of everything going on around him and could weigh the tempo and the speed and the hardness of his pass very intuitively and instantly. And we talked about this must be both being a state of flow but also not using your brain, and
Yeah.
because there's so many different things going on at the same time, and the only way to keep track of everything is if the consciousness is in the whole body at the same time, and connected at the same time. And if you look at the memory of water that you described, that explains it. And it it just makes so much sense when you look at it. So that aspect of understanding human potential, understanding behavior, explaining things that are the day-to-day life experience that seem mystical can actually be explained by this theory, which is that's one aspect why this is important. The other aspect that you mentioned, that's a totally different course, and that's why we're so excited to have you at the conference as well, is the server halls. So if you could reduce the size of computers, that could change the whole. That could change a lot, because I had to look this up while we were talking. So in Sweden, you have a lot of server halls for Microsoft, you have for Google, you have big companies have, because we have a lot of space. So we have a lot of those server halls.
And cheap energy.
Yeah, and cheap energy as well, because we have the natural resources, we have the different streams, we have wind. We have cheap energy in Sweden. But the server halls in Gävle, that's actually like 1 hour north of Uppsala, where you'll be speaking. Microsoft has their halls there. Those server halls are using as much energy as a mid-sized city.
Oh my.
So
Yeah.
it's if you look into how much energy that goes into these server halls that are based on this silicon 1-0 on off, that principle. I mean, if you could reduce that energy expenditure by 50%, but what you're talking about is probably like even lower than that. If those server halls were to use easy water for memory storage, how much smaller do you think they would be?
Well, we calculated once, and it was something like either 10 to the 6th or 10 to the ninth. I mean, we're talking about many orders of magnitude smaller, because we're talking about the atomic scale.
Mm,
How close is one oxygen close to the next oxygen,
mm,
right? And that's many orders of magnitude different from one transistor next to another transistor. Um, so I'm not sure if that will ever be realized, but I think the potential is there uh, to to do it. And also, we're talking about easy water being a liquid crystal, uh, but it's possible now. An Italian group, and we've duplicated their work, has shown that you could actually convert easy water into a solid.
mhm.
The easy water, getting rid of uh, of well, it's beyond the discussion here, but you can do it, and therefore the idea putting a gel-like substance into a container. You don't need to do that. You can actually put a powder in and get the same. Well, it's not clear that you could get the same results, but potentially you can get the same results. So it could be fairly easy to implement. Obviously, we're talking about years of development, but it could be absolutely worthwhile.
Yeah, but and that's the so of course it's years in development. Of course this is, but if you look at the possibilities here, you have the one thing we talked about now was the potential for me and my memory and my life and how I feel alive and my own creation of my infrared light and how I can basically be healthier, more alive. That's one part of it. The other part is using this as memory storage in computers and reducing the need for electricity, reducing the that has great effects for energy production, for climate, for all of those things that we as a society deem so important. And then we haven't even talked about diseases yet, because that's the other thing we're talking about, right?
We haven't talked about diseases, and that's where your father's question
From a while ago, yeah.
a while ago comes up, and and I'm happy to talk about it. Uh,
We can save that for the conference.
For the conference.
okay, well, yeah.
No, we can talk a little bit about it, at least the principle of it.
Well, as you like. I unfortunately, in 15 minutes or so, I need to.
We can take that. I think we can take that to conference.
As you like, but I'm happy to talk about it now. If
we have 15 minutes, I think we can at least start.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start. I start with if the water inside the cell is like a liquid crystal, that's pretty close to ice. It's organized, and if it's organized in that way, nothing can happen. If you can imagine the situation of ice where everything is very well organized, and you can imagine a protein, let's say, embedded in the ice, can't do anything, can't bend, can't twist, can't fold. It's pretty much the same in structured water. So the question is, well, how on earth can the cell work? How can a muscle contract, or how can a secretory cell secrete, or how can a nerve cell conduct? Right? Nothing can happen. Well, I thought about that, and the second half of that Cells and Gels book addresses that. So I researched it, and I found that there's, for me, convincing evidence that in at least a half dozen cell types, the cell undergoes a phase transition. That is, a phase transition could be like from ice to water, or from water to vapor. Those are classic phase transitions, where everything, the whole of physical chemical features are completely different. And it seemed that way, that in the case of, for example, of muscle cells, that's a good example because I have some experience in that. What happens is when the muscle is not contracting, the water is organized. Gilbert Ling would say structured. I would say fourth phase water, or easy water, filled with easy water. And then what happens is when the muscle contracts, everything changes. The water changes from easy water to liquid water, and that change means that the proteins now are in a completely different environment, and they can undergo a folding, which is what precipitates the contraction, or precipitates the action in any kind of cell. I found that was the case for a half dozen most of the most common cells. So it seemed to me that that's a general feature that I've kept in mind. And one of the features that that I discovered later is, since the easy water is negatively charged, and ordinary liquid water is not charged at all, there should be a change of electrical potential when this phase transition occurs. And that's the action potential that I'm not sure if you're familiar, but we learned a lot about action potentials. It was then thought of as the trigger of whatever the cell would do. The action potential was a separate event, but it's not a separate event. It's actually part and parcel of this phase transition. If you go from negatively charged easy water to liquid water, the potential should go from minus 60, 70, 80 to zero. And that's exactly what happens in the action potential. So you could kind of take that as a prediction of this theory, which actually is borne out. So what happens is the action of the cell and also the energy that gets delivered is when the easy water transitions to liquid water. Now, if your cell is filled with easy water, as healthy cells like you guys, healthy cells, the transition is a big one, a major one, from minus 80 millivolts or something to zero. It means that a lot of easy water, which contains potential energy, undergoes a transition to no energy. The energy gets delivered. And for a muscle contraction, for the muscle cells, this is a big change. And so your muscle can lift a large weight. Now, if your cells are not up to par, if they're somewhat dysfunctional, it means you have less easy water, and it means that the transition will be a smaller one. So your muscle can't contract as much; it can't lift as much weight, or the secretory process is not as robust as it would be if the cell were full of easy water. And if the cell has very little easy water, small initial electrical potential, then it's pathological. It really can hardly do anything. And if the cell has extremely small amount of easy water, then it's completely dysfunctional. Now, so this is a kind of general paradigm. Healthy cells, lots of easy water, big magnitude electrical potential. At the other extreme are cancer cells. Now, why am I mentioning this? It's not, Hans, just in response to your question about cancer, but it suggests a different view of cancer and how cancer develops and how you can treat it. So, and it starts with a researcher. His name escapes me at the moment. 50 years ago, he was interested in what prompts cells to divide. Clarence Cohn is his name. What prompts cells to divide? And what he found experimentally is that if the electrical potential is large, in other words, 80, 90 millivolts at the magnitude, it'll never divide. If it's very small, on the order of 10, 20 millivolts, it divides all the time, as do cancer cells. So his idea was that cancer cells have a low electrical potential, which at the time seemed known, and that's why they keep dividing. I confirmed that by checking a review article published 10 years ago, in which they confirmed that all cells that divide, no exception, whether it's a cancer cell or an embryonic cell, which cells divide for a living, they all have very small magnitude electrical potential, negative electrical potential, but small magnitude, and without exception. And other cells that rarely divide have high magnitude electrical potential. What's new is that we now understand that low magnitude electrical potential means not much easy water. Not much easy water means that the phase transition from the easy to liquid water is feeble. can hardly do anything, and the amount of energy that you have is very small. Not much energy is delivered with this phase transition, and so that's the idea in cancer. That if you look with by electron microscopy, if you look at these cells that are cancer cells, the organelles are very few, and the ones that you do see there are disrupted in some way. So somehow the carcinogens, whatever they may be, are somehow affecting the genetic system, which produces proteins that are aberrant, are modified from the usual, and the cell keeps dividing, so it can't keep up by producing new organelles. And there's not much, therefore, the surfaces that are necessary to build easy water are not there. And therefore, there's not much easy water. Therefore, the cell keeps continuing to divide and runs downhill. So,
have you heard about Björn Nordstrand?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you put,
I used to say he was when he got to lung cancer, he treated with electricity.
yes, and it fits perfectly with this
That
theory.
was the same idea.
But another thing, Hans, that struck me is that I don't know if you remember the conversation we had in episode 54 of the Fascia Guide about mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah.
So when there is a state that people have discovered there's a global in the body global thing. So it's not in one location. It's happening all over the body at the same time, and that is that the mitochondria, is it called mitochondria in English? Yes.
Mitochondria.
Yeah, they reduce their energy production, so they don't produce as much energy, and that makes you it causes fatigue basically. And what's interesting that you're saying is that, like, if I'm a cell and I can't produce enough energy, a solution that I would think of is to split myself, because I have that ability, and then I can produce more energy, I think, because I can split myself, because then I have two powerhouses, two
Okay,
mitochondria.
Did you say speak to yourself? I didn't.
No, if I was a split, if I was a
split.
cell, this is
Oh,
what how so one reason the cells could be splitting is because the energy production is low, and that's why you're splitting, so you can increase the energy production, but that causes the wrong. Then you're in the wrong zone as well. So it's interesting because it fits into a lot of other things we've heard and talked about, being the low energy being the problem. Because if you look at, we had another thing we talked about the other day about epigenetics and cortisol production. So if you're under if you're chronically stressed, then you produce too much cortisol, and the nerve receptors that will receive the cortisol and tell the production to stop, they will start to be overloaded, and then they will be epigenetically turned off, which means that you have a never stopping cortisol production. And the cortisol production also causes the collagen fibers of the connective tissue to be more fragile, because it's breaking it down, which means you're more receptive to physical force, or you're weaker in your body. But it also, if you have that cortisol injection all the time, that constant stress, your body would also be working with dealing with that, which means it would require more energy and you would be more fatigued. So it's all connected in an interesting sense, and it's interesting to hear you talk about that the easy water cells won't split, and that's yeah.
Well, and I just a comment about the mitochondria. See, I think a possibility is that what goes on in the mitochondria is the buildup of easy water inside the mitochondria, and the reason for thinking that is that if you measure the electrical potential or potential difference between inside and outside, it's a couple of hundred millivolts, and that's what we measure in the EZ. Also, the structure of the mitochondria has a series of membranes, and those membranes are organized in such a way that it's easy to envision the buildup of easy water. And the third is you need, if the cell undergoes a phase transition, after the phase transition, you have to undergo the reverse transition. In the case of muscles in particular, where there are lots of mitochondria, you need to do that quickly because you may need to contract again soon. And the abundance of mitochondria in muscle tissue mean that there's a supply of easy water right there where you need it. And if it's not necessarily the supply of easy water, it's the negative charge that belongs to the easy water that can be dispersed. And we know that if you inject negative charge, this water, ordinary water, converts to easy water. That's a second way of building it. So this is could be nature's way of rebuilding easy water in a rapid fashion. It remains to be studied. It's right now is
But that's where I think you will have interesting conversations with Thomas Levy, because he's been studying vitamin C, which is negative charge, and we're looking at earthing and cold bathing and saunas. That is also a negative charge. So it would be interesting to have you at the convention.
Well, thank you. Just one more in terms of the question Hans asked. In the cancer idea, which I published a paper on that just less than 1 year ago, but the consequence, if in the hypothesis, is that there's a way to reverse the cancer. All you need to do, in theory anyway, is to rebuild easy water. So what you were suggesting earlier about ways, really easy ways to build easy water, they should be beneficial for patients who have cancer. And some of them are already known to be beneficial. So this is for me, is a promising area of study in the future to see whether some of these expedients that are known to build easy water are actually reversing cancer. Is a kind of central hypothesis. So yeah, more during the conference.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
Well, respecting your time, we're so happy to have you here. We're so happy to have you in Uppsala on June 14th and 15th. And thank you for a very interesting conversation.
well, thank you. You guys are amazing. I must say, uh, among the most amazing I've met. So thank you. Okay,
Thank you.
we'll see you then.
Yeah.
Take care.